Hi, everybody. Good morning. I put up a status earlier this morning talking about how if you want to lose weight, if you want to keep it off and not keep regaining the pounds over and over again, you really have to think about your metabolism as more of a thermostat and not just exclusively a calculator, which is what I think a lot of us have been taught. And it's very easy to, think of your metabolism as only a calculator, and it's just not. Because if you look at programs like, you look at like Weight Watchers, and you look at like maybe If It Fits Your Macros, generally speaking, those programs are only looking at calories in, calories out, and they're not looking at anything else. So I do want to start off by saying that I'm definitely not going to dispute that we need to look at calories in, calories out when you're losing weight. That's absolutely a big factor in weight loss. So we do have to look at that. However, we can't just only look at calories in, calories out. We have to look at hormones, but we also can't just look at hormones. We have to look at a lot of different things. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is the law of metabolic compensation. And that's not really something that people are educated about. They're not really they're just not educated on that at all, because I don't really think that most people really understand it. So I took some notes of some things I wanted to talk about, so I didn't miss any points here, because I know for a lot of you, this is like a really new subject. So I want to talk about the law of metabolic compensation, and I want to talk about adaptive thermogenesis. So we're going to cover both of those today. So what happens when you start a diet? So when most people start a diet, they are going to cut calories, and if they don't just cut calories, they're going to cut carbs, which more or less does end up reducing your calories, right? So most people nowadays, they're either cutting their calories or they're cutting their carbs, which they're doing through keto, which does end up being more or less a calorie restrictive diet. So they've done all of that. So you're taking away energy sources from your body. So like I said, we do need to restrict what you're eating to a certain degree in order to lose weight. But the problem is that given time, your body is going to adapt to this, because that's what it does. It's a highly adaptive organism. So it's going to adapt to increased activity and a lowered caloric intake. So what happens is it will kick back in the opposite direction. So if you cut calories aggressively, like let's say you cut calories by 1,000 a day and you're a 150-pound woman, and you add an hour of cardio a day, and you start losing weight. You start losing weight, your clothes start fitting better. So this might work for you for maybe like 1 week, maybe 2 weeks, maybe 3 if you're lucky. Then right around the 4-week mark, you're tired, you're hungry, your weight loss slows down, and it seems like nothing that you're doing is working anymore. So this is like the classic story that every dieter goes through. So what's going on? Well, what most people do, not understanding what's going on, is they dial back their calories even more, and then they add in even more exercise. So that might mean, like, let's say they're doing 30 minutes of cardio, now they're doing 45 minutes of cardio. Maybe they were eating 1,800 calories, now they're eating 1,600 calories. So we do need to recognize that as you lose weight, your body is going to need less calories to function. So we definitely know that. So of course there's going to be some caloric reduction as you improve your composition anyway. But the problem arises when you continually cut back calories, cut back more and more and more and more, and then you increase your cardio on top of it all. This is going to trigger some adaptive mechanisms by your body. So where it's going to alter things is it's going to change how your hypothalamus behaves, which is in your brain. It's going to alter how your pituitary gland functions. It's going to lower your thyroid, potentially. So this isn't going to happen for everybody, but this is a pretty strong possibility of happening in just about anybody that's going to be dieting aggressively. So people end up reaching the standstill where they've started at dieting at 1,800 calories. They've done, maybe 30 minutes of cardio, and as they start not seeing results, they cut their calories to 1,200. They're doing an hour of cardio a day. That's not working. They add another hour of cardio a day, and now they're in this really dangerous territory. So this is where the law of metabolic compensation really comes into play. So they may be the same size as they were, maybe 4 weeks into the plan when their weight loss slowed, and now they're doing all of this extra cardio. They've cut all of these extra calories, and they really don't look any different. They may actually look a little bit worse. So what happened? So these adaptive mechanisms in the body kicked in and they started to slow things down. They start to adapt to the type of cardio that you're doing, and they slow down calorie usage. So that is a very real thing that happens to a lot of dieters, and they have no idea. So they just keep cutting back and they keep doing more cardio, and they do things like that. So I'm going to be linking a study into the comments section where they actually did a study on the Biggest Loser contestants. And this was found in PubMed. Like I said, I'm going to link it down there for you. And they found that prolonged dieting and excessive exercise actually slowed metabolic rate. So you hear that and you go, oh my gosh, like I've been doing this, how long is this going to happen? This particular study found that the contestants experienced a slowed metabolic rate for like up to a year. So if you have been very aggressively dieting, really aggressively doing cardio, group classes. I mean, I know some people will tell me, I'm only eating 1,200 calories. I go to 2 group classes and then I go lift weights and I'm still not losing any weight. You're probably in some type of metabolic compensation. And the only thing that you can do from there is you're going to have to cut back because your body has now adapted to all those things. And this is what can happen to a lot of people that are aerobics instructors, any type of person that teaches classes. This is very likely to happen if they're dieting on top of teaching classes, because they've got all this activity that they're doing and their body's adapted to it, and it's learned how to use calories a lot more slowly because they're not taking in a ton of food. So this is very relevant if you teach classes, anybody that's really active all day long and they've got a lowered caloric intake and they're not losing weight and they've been doing it for a really long time. So this is what I'm talking about when I talk about the law of metabolic compensation and adaptive thermogenesis. So there's always going to be somebody that's going to pop in that's going to say, well, hold on a second. This is impossible. Have you ever seen a prisoner of war? Have you read the Minnesota study? And my response to that is those are really not good comparisons. So, if you look at a prisoner of war, right? Somebody that is in a condition where they're being starved, they're not being given food, things like that, we're going to assume that these people that are taken prisoner have not been extreme dieting before they've gone into this situation where the food has been taken away from them and they're being starved. And these people end up looking emaciated once they're finally liberated or released. However, if you've got a chronic dieter would actually survive a lot better in that type of scenario than someone that has never dieted, because their body has learned how to slow down energy usage and survive on very little. So what's happening is it's adaptive. These are adaptive reactions to behaviors that you are doing. And like I said, the things that are causing this are the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, even the thyroid gland. A lot of people will say like, oh my gosh, I started dieting and I'm so cold. And a lot of people will pat them on the back and be like, oh, it's because you lost all this body fat. And while it's true, you may be a little bit more sensitive to the cold when you lose body fat. However, what's more likely happening is that your thyroid has started to slow down to compensate for all of the calories that you've cut and all the activity that you're doing. So you're going to be more sensitive to the cold. Your internal body temperature is going to be lower. So we know internal body temperature is like 98.6 degrees. And that is a very healthy place for your body to be. Now, if you want to check and see if you have a thyroid dysregulation or downregulation problem, the easiest thing that you can do for free, you can do it in your home, you can do it in the next 5 seconds. If you have a thermometer, go get a thermometer, take your temperature, and if your temperature is in like the 96-degree range, there's a pretty good possibility that your thyroid has slowed down for whatever reason. If you're aggressively dieting, there's a good chance that your thyroid has slowed to adapt for the lower caloric intake that you're taking in. And that's something that can happen too when you're stressed. So keep that in mind too. Your thyroid will lower when you are stressed out. So if you're taking your temperature, your thyroid's lower, you're very stressed, give yourself some time, let yourself, recover a little bit. Then you can take your temperature again. It should be back in a normal range. Now the problem with thyroid tests and going to the doctor, so I'm going to go off on a little bit of a tangent here, but it's all, relative in this whole conversation. Doctors really are only going to be testing one value, and that's TSH. It's thyroid stimulating hormone. It's a very poor measurement of what's going on with your thyroid health, because there are many other variables that we have to look at. We have to look at T3, T4, reverse T3, T4, and then maybe even TPO. and those things are never measured by doctors ever, unless you ask for it specifically. So, you know, you may have heard this conversation. You go to your doctor, get your thyroid tested. They say, oh, your TSH is fine, but what's fine? I like to see TSH values of 2.0 or better. Doctors will accept 5.0, which to me is unacceptable, because to me that's the beginnings of a budding problem of a thyroid issue. So if you go to your doctor, you may not get a ton of help unless you specifically say, I want these other tests, T3, T4, reverse T3, reverse T4, and possibly TPO, which is going to detect the presence of thyroid antibodies, which would mean you may have some type of autoimmune condition going on. So you would see that in like a Hashimoto's type condition. So I'm going to bring it back to what we were talking about, which is calories in, calories out. Why does it stop working? What's, you know, why do we have to think of your body like a thermostat? So like I said, I wrote some notes down here, so I want to make sure I didn't miss any points. But the bottom line is you can only really take an extreme approach to dieting for so long before your body is going to kick back and it's going to adapt, because that's what it does. Your body's a very highly adaptive organism. It's not just a calculator. So if you're somebody that has been aggressively reducing your calories, you've been aggressively adding more and more and more cardio, and you're not losing weight, you probably have entered this metabolic adaptation where things have slowed down, and things have slowed down because your body's trying to protect you. So this is typically when people will say, well, I need to try a new diet, and my friend did keto, so it must be my carbs. That's the problem. I should just go do keto. And to that, I would say, do not do that. Think very carefully, evaluate what you've been doing before you take on another dieting approach, because in many cases, it's not that you need a new diet, it's that you need to change your behaviors, you need to maybe do less exercise. The problem with the keto diet is if you have an existing thyroid condition, it could potentially make it much worse. And the same thing goes for intermittent fasting. So intermittent fasting, real quick, because people ask me about this all the time, that's when you restrict your eating for a certain number of hours a day. So some people will fast for 14 hours, some people 16, 18. Women tend to do not very well much over hour 16. They tend to have metabolic adaptation. Men can do okay at around hour 18 and on. However, if you are somebody that has a thyroid condition, if you are somebody that has cold sensitivity, I would not be suggesting that you do intermittent fasting, because you are going to continue to send a message to your body that it is starving, that there is a lack of food, and that it may even downregulate your thyroid function even further. So I would not suggest intermittent fasting for someone that is an extreme dieter, like ever. I think there's other things that we'd want to take a look at before you would consider any intermittent fasting. Intermittent fasting is not really good for yo-yo dieters, because then you can kind of revert back to binge eating behaviors. Once your fast is over, you can have these enormous meals, and then you feel guilty, and then you try and fast to undo what you ate. So like I said, I don't really want to go off too far on a tangent here, but all of these topics are very relevant, because when people are at a standstill, these are the tools that they look towards. They look at keto, they look at intermittent fasting, they look at if it fits your macros, and they try and get a handle on that caloric intake and keep dialing it back even further. Or they try and find other ways to control their intake to get the outcome they're looking for. Sometimes people are successful, sometimes they aren't successful. And the reason why most of these people aren't successful is because they are in metabolic compensation. And like I said, that's when the body has slowed many processes down in order to preserve the small energy intake that it is taking in. So that's just something to keep in mind when you're dieting. I know a lot of people are starting to diet, aggressively again, because their kids are going back to school, and people are doing challenges, and they're doing fasting, and they're doing keto, and doing all of these things that they didn't feel like they could do over the summer. So my word of caution would be, if you are a chronic dieter, please very carefully consider a very low caloric intake. I wouldn't suggest it. I would not suggest intermittent fasting for you. There's a very specific person that does well with intermittent fasting, and you need to pay attention to the clues that your body is giving you if you're going to undertake things like that. So if anybody has any questions, oh, hey, Shelly. If you have any questions, you can pop that down below in the comments. Like I said, I'm also going to link the study on PubMed. that looks at the Biggest Loser contestants, and it shows that they did indeed have some metabolic compensation after rigorously dieting and exercising, and it lasted for a while. So we have to think long term when we're trying to lose weight. We can't just try and like cut 20 pounds like that using really extreme methods, because not only is it going to be damaging psychologically, it's also potentially going to give you fairly permanent metabolic adaptative changes. So we have to think long term. If anyone has questions, like I said, pop them on. I don't see any, but if you thought this was useful, you can hit that share button, because it seems like everybody's jumping back on the wagon right now. And I hope you have a really great weekend. Thanks, guys.